Okay, hold on.
Perfect spot.
Well,
Can
when
we
you
do a
ready.
countdown, a 5-second countdown?
Yeah.
All right.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go!
Today we're going to talk about Housing First, which is an approach to addressing homelessness. Housing First is a simple yet revolutionary idea that asks, why can't we just house people in need? And what happens if we do? Now, the traditional approach to addressing homelessness in the United States is a staircase model in which people progress through steps that inevitably prepare them for housing. So these steps may include shelters, clinics, transitional housing, and then finally housing. And this standard approach is often referred to as treatment first, in that it requires people to seek treatment before they're considered housing worthy or housing ready. In a way, it flipped Maslow's hierarchy of needs on its head and said, hey, you be the best version of yourself first before you get housing. Yeah. The Housing First approach differs in that it starts people at the top of the staircase. People who have the most needs, those who have disabling conditions and have experienced long-term homelessness, chronic homelessness, are immediately offered permanent housing without preconditions of sobriety or employment or treatment. Housing First seeks to reduce the months and year-long delays that contribute to people cycling in and out of treatment programs in hospitals and jails and unstable living situations. And there's so many of those. As public housing in the US is notorious for its long waiting lists, Housing First creatively taps into a pre-existing stock of housing units on the rental market. And the approach works with landlords to reserve a portion of their units for Housing First clients. As part of their housing, clients will sign a standard lease and will pay 30% of their income for their housing, which is often covered by federal funding, which is usually in the form of housing choice vouchers. Yeah. Once housed, people are in the driver's seat, which means that they move at their own pace. And a key choice of Housing First is consumer choice. So that means that clients are the experts of their own needs and their wants, and support services are provided, but they're voluntary. The persistent mental model was that people who were homeless and dealing with disabling conditions and addictions wouldn't be able to live on their own. And the fact that Housing First did not mandate treatment services was met with a lot of skepticism. Housing First has since proven that people can go directly from street to home. Studies have shown that Housing First clients do not experience greater rates of alcohol and substance use than people in treatment first programs. These findings help support Housing First beliefs in harm reduction and consumer choice. Evaluations of Housing First initiatives indicate that over the course of 2 years, about 80 to 88% of people remain stably housed, as compared to 30 to 47% of people in treatment first programs. Housing First has also led to cost savings for healthcare and for the healthcare and criminal justice systems, as people in Housing First programs utilize less of those interventions, police interventions, hospital interventions, medical interventions, and also done annual costs savings can range from like $5,000 to $43,000 per person. Housing First is also unique in that it has bipartisan support, and in that sense it has political capital. It's contributed to a paradigm shift in how mental health can be treated, and a movement away from managing homelessness to ending homelessness. Of course, if you want to end homelessness, you have to address the root cause, which is poverty. Since the 1980s recession, there's been more people, but less money shared. And the subsequent lack of affordable housing and the rise in income disparity leads us to where we're at now. To be clear, Housing First doesn't reduce poverty. At best, it provides ongoing care and quicker access to housing to a subset of the population of people experiencing homelessness, but there's still an inadequate stock of affordable housing and a lack of neighborhoods that welcome the construction of affordable housing. This often leads to situations where people in Housing First programs remain in segregated, economically disadvantaged communities. And they struggle to integrate as a result. So what do we do? Here's some suggestions. 1, pass and enforce laws that prohibit landlords from discriminating against people with housing choice vouchers. Deregulate local buffers that delay and prevent the construction of permanent supportive housing. And then the third one is subsidize people more generously and rewrite the rules that bump people off Social Security. It should be noted that the cost savings that the Housing First model affords the medical systems and criminal justice systems are not rewarded to the US housing system, but what if they were? What if all the money that was saved through Housing First was then reallocated as community investment funds? There's also the question of who Housing First has served and who it can serve. Housing First has been used to help people experiencing chronic homelessness, and it has contributed to reducing that population size by 30% in the past decade. But what about people transitioning out of prisons and youth exiting foster care? These are important, vulnerable populations to consider, especially if we want to disrupt the homelessness cycle. In the future, I hope for less shelters and more homes, and I hope that our collective goal shifts from managing and ending homelessness to ending poverty. Thanks. Questions?
Oh.
A lot of info, I know.
It's really interesting. I wanted you to expand more on the funding, like how do these Housing First initiatives get funding to be able to house homeless individuals?
Yeah, the primary funding mechanism is the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. Yeah, that's the simple but most direct answer I can give you. It is the only agency in the U.S. that deals with homelessness, that invests in addressing homelessness.
I have a question, Harsh, in regards to the mental model. Some of the suggestions you gave primarily dealt with legislature, and I'm sort of in a place where I'm curious about, like, what are the effects of legislature on people's hearts and mindsets and mental models? And so I'm curious if what do you think are the social changes needed to alleviate not just like obviously poverty, but homelessness? What can we do to make this more of a social movement? More of a social movement to alleviate homelessness.
Sure. So this reminds me of the 1,000 Homes campaign, and if we're thinking back to like Switch, right? Pointing to a destination, that movement clearly said like we want to house 100,000 people in X amount of years. And that specificity I think is really helpful in addressing issues like this. Otherwise it's just that like all-encompassing how do we cure homelessness, you know?
Right.
And also it's you reframe it, so we're talking about ideas. You can reframe it as the idea of people are dying on the streets, as opposed to, people are there because of their own issues, right? And why are people dying on the streets? I think back to our nation and national pride, and is that something to be proud of? And the answer is no. It's a huge shame, honestly. We should be very ashamed.
Thanks, Harsh.
Yeah.
My question was, in your research, did you find examples of organizations that are doing Housing First model?
Tons. Yeah, within the last, Housing First started in the 1990s, really, in New York. A man named Sam Sembarisis really helped to innovate it in a way, or just train people up on the idea. You see Housing First programs across the world in Canada, in Europe, in Australia. So yeah, there's also different approaches to it too. I was specifically talking about models that already use the pre-existing stock of houses, right? and work with landlords. There's also the other idea that you can just build up larger facilities for housing first to occur. The only danger with that, and some organizations do that, one that comes to mind is an organization called Common Ground, is that you run the risk of creating an institutionalization, which is not the goal, right? Especially if you want community integration. Any more questions?